I'm here with Suzy González. She is an artist, curator, educator, and community organizer based in San Antonio. Welcome, Suzy. I'm so glad you're joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. The first thing I want to ask you is, I don't know, I've seen you're a very prolific artist. You have all these things on your website that you've done over the years. How did you first begin doing art, and when did it start becoming a passion for you?
Yeah, so I guess so I did my undergrad at Texas State, and was starting as a journalism major and a photo minor, and I started taking those, introductory foundation art classes, and I always had kind of done it as a hobby, painting or something, but I never thought that this could be like a real career because you're not told that, and so I just felt like, okay, I think I can do this, and went for it, and that kind of thing where your passion for art takes over, and you just kind of gotta jump in and see what happens.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I studied painting at Texas State, and then painting at RISD as well, and um, I. I think I'm just interested in a array of things. I like to make art, but I also like to support other artists, and so I found that through self-publishing, through curation, that kind of thing. So I think community is really important to kind of get out of our egos and our studios
Mhm.
and see how we can work with other artists as well.
Yep. Um, what kinds of different education have you found as an artist? Because you've been to undergraduate and graduate school for art, but I know that we all also find our arts education outside of school as well, and for some people entirely. So,
Yeah.
um, what are some different experiences you've had both in and outside the classroom, and how has that influenced your art?
Yeah, I think for me, it's important for me to have a foot to kind of be aware of the importance that can come from, like a community dialogue, and the importance that can come from like an institution, and also being critical, of the institution while you're in it, and
Hmm.
seeing how you can change it. I am an adjunct professor as well, so always seeing like how we can decolonize the classroom, or teach students that are students of color about artists of color rather than focusing on the European, isms of like of the art world, right? And so yeah, I think for me, I like to have my foot kind of in multiple worlds. I think grassroots. I've done some workshops where it's kind of like you donate whatever you can, and then uh, the institution. I have a lot to critique, of course, especially grad school. It's institutions were made for white folks, and for men, and that kind of thing. And so like how we can find a kind of I think as like artists of color find our way within them and try to kind of tackle them from within is one way to go about it, but that doesn't mean it's the right way. If you want to totally be against it and do your own thing, that's the right way for you, then I support that, and for me, I think it's been kind of just trying to be aware of it from a more objective perspective, and then seeing like, well, how can I benefit from different kind of art worlds, because there's not just one, right? And
Hmm.
how can I kind of maneuver through them and take what I've learned, in school to bring that to my community, but also always being willing to learn in return from non-traditional kind of classrooms, or that kind of thing. So always, I think the educator should also always be the learner, and that's never going to stop.
Yeah. So your artwork and your educational and curatorial work um, deals a lot with decolonization, and I think there are some people have varying levels of familiarity with that as a concept and as a set of actions. So I was wondering what decolonizing um, art and arts education and art history, what that means to you personally.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's such a huge question
I
because,
know.
in one way, it's like, well, if we're truly decolonizing, there is no institution, right? It's like there
Right.
are no borders, there are no any of these things that are these structures, these systems that have been built. But since they exist, it's kind of like, what can we do with what we've got? And I don't think anyone has all the answers. So it's a lot of questioning, and like, and discussing, and like, well, what do you think this means? What do you know? How can we come to terms with this and try to just work towards it? A lot of folks will use the term re-indigenize, instead. It kind of removes that colonial, power from, language is everything, right? And
Right.
the words that we choose to use to discuss, difficult or progressive thoughts. But for me, I've from what I've learned with speaking with folks, I think a lot of it is collective work, dialogue oriented kind of problem solving. Um, trying to get away from that this individual thing of that we're told is like also to produce like this
Mhm.
capitalist notion of like you got to always be making. There's a lot of magic that can come in thinking and experimenting, and things that don't necessarily end with a product that is sellable or that kind of thing. Let's think here. That again, that idea that we're always open to learning. How can I learn from my students? I'm not the necessarily the authoritative figure at the front of the classroom. How can it be more non-hierarchical when we have these discussions? And and that doesn't mean that there's not leaders in the room, because I think sometimes that's how things can fall apart, is if we're so horizontal that there's no guidance or leadership. And I think it's just about kind of passing that leadership torch around, because even if someone's not loud, and even if someone's not like posture and like having this like authoritative like feel to them, doesn't mean they can't be a leader, right? Or that they aren't, quiet folks can be leaders. And so when people think of like, especially people who are learning to make art for the first time, or something, very subconscious, very self-conscious about, oh, I don't know how to draw. And well, it's because what you think is good drawing is Leonardo da Vinci, is Michelangelo, is like this incredibly rendered, realistic, observational. What you're seeing is exactly represented, and that is our, again, is us favoring whiteness, and as better or as the best. And if we look at the first people who were making art, right? If we look at indigenous artists who there's not names to a lot of them, because it's not about that ego driven, this one guy is famous. And there are so many different ways of working, whether it's like codices or pottery, things that are practical for use, or expressive native geometric imagery. These are all appropriated by modern white male artists, and who became famous for it.
Exactly.
And so the history of abstraction, right? The origins are in native artwork. And so, going back and really thinking about the trajectory of art history, and being always kind of trying to being open and critical, and thoughtful of why are certain artists more well known than others. I think a lot about representation in museums, and this often we see this different sector of fine art and folk
Yep.
art, and the racial implications of that. And there's so much to dissect. The fact that like museums are where the wealthy store their collections and get people to pay to look at it. It's like the industry is, when you really think about it, it's like, oh, that's kind of sketchy. And so just I think always questioning. And I'm forgetting what it was about, decolonizing. Yeah. And so thinking about, if you're someone who's wanting to make work in this way, uh, how to return to those roots, which are not gone. It's this notion of like, well, colonization happened, we're living in it, it's still happening, and yet we're still connected to our culture, whether it's like through food or art or spiritual practices or medicine or anything like that. It's like this is just a blip in it, but we haven't lost it, right? So remembering that like it's still in us and it's in our memory and it's in our lineage and what has been favored is, especially with like Latinx folks, with Chicanx folks, what is favored is the whiteness, is the Spanish, right? And yet we forget about all these other parts of us that are really important to maintain, especially for our health and our sanity and our livelihood. That we pass that on to the next generations. But so through art, I guess I do that by trying to subvert things like the nude in art, which we also could be um, critiqued for being objectifying, or we see women's bodies are always in the eyes of men. This idea of the male gaze, and so I think a lot about how I can portray the figure without sexualizing it, and have it be more representative of cultural groups or a variety of people rather than like one like ideal body that is
Mhm.
beautiful or whatever that means, right? Um, and then materials, I think about a lot, and where they come from and their origins, as I do with like food and how what materials we're using and who we're benefiting and when we buy things and where they're coming from. So I'm trying to work more with plant materials. Most I've been using the corn husk. I'm really attached to it now because I've kind of
I
figured
noticed
out
in your
how
painting.
to
Yeah.
manipulate it and and again, not saying that everything that comes out of Europe is evil or whatever, because if we're hating on that, I'm hating on parts of myself, right? And so I don't believe in just like excommunicating anything that's unfavorable, and this like idea of the colonizer and the colonized living within us, but to just kind of be observant and know like, okay, if I'm using oil paint, if I'm painting in a certain way, I know that I am embracing this part of me and this part of art history, and that's cool. And then if I want to work with this other thing, then that's cool too. And so trying to have that objective viewpoint, but also um, just kind of using different materials is a way for me to embrace different parts of my identity. So I know that was a long
Well,
answer.
it was a very big question. I think you answered
Yeah.
really well. It merits a long answer. And I was actually going to ask you about the materials you use, but you've already answered that. I think your combination of materials and the symbolism behind it is really interesting and wonderful. Actually, I didn't even realize it was that you used corn husks as well in your paintings, and I was looking at them for a while. And when I realized what it was, it made me really happy about the way you use that material.
Yeah, thank you. And just a little more on that is, I feel like if I wanted to entirely embrace the natural or something, I would probably use like natural dyes, or I would use, I think about the reason why most of what has survived, and when we look at ancient art, is ceramics, is pottery. A lot of prints have faded with time. A lot of things that would have been made out of natural materials, we do have some textiles, right, things like that. And so you see what doesn't last as well. And then I think of this idea of archivalness, and like that's a colonial construct, right? Because
Um,
we die and then some art collector collects it and it goes to some museum, and then it's worth way more than we ever would have been paid while we were alive. And it's like archivalness is not for the artist, it's like for the collector after the fact, is like, and so that's kind of disturbing. But also you want it's so important that the voices of artists of color like live on. And so uh, I think it's really complicated. And then so I'll use synthetic dyes on the natural husk to
yeah.
kind of
Mhm.
embrace this complexity of identity rather than say like I'm just this or I'm just that. It's like this is really complex, and how can we talk about like nature and culture and like how they're not opposing, and all these kind of ideas we have of like binaries, folk art, fine art, and like what does it mean to try to be both or to be neither, or that kind of thing. So yeah, using like synthetic materials next to natural materials, and
I
then
wanted to ask you about your zines. Do you also make zines and have I believe a monthly zine that has multiple contributors? Called
so
Decade?
yeah, not necessarily every month. That's the thing with making zines, is like it's all your own deadlines. So I co-publish Yes Ma'am with El Minter, who's based in Austin, and we've been doing our feminist intersectional feminist zine since 2011. So next year we get to celebrate 10 years, which is just, I can't believe it. But yeah, so and that is contributor based, and we're going to be putting out a call for submissions very soon, and the theme is going to be on self care, because that's just something that I think we're all talking about right now, and how can we keep our minds, our bodies, our spirits like okay right now, and so hoping we get a good amount of information. It'll be a knowledge share, I think, in a lot of ways. And then I make Chicana Vegan Zine, and I've been doing calls for that as well, so contributor based. And that one is based on this, in one way, the concept of decolonizing diet and kind of trying to reclaim this plant-based, majority plant-based diet of our indigenous ancestors, and then also caring for animals, and trying to take care of our bodies, and veganized traditional recipes. A lot of people think, Mexican food or Tex-Mex food is like has to be cheesy, and it has to have some kind of something from the cow, and and it's not necessarily the case. When we look at our ancestors, it's like so much like beans, squash, corn, tomatoes, and so things that provide us with a full diet, full set of nutrients, and can be medicine in their own way. So that's kind of the premise of Chicana Vegan. I've gotten some cool submissions, some based on like how like getting rid of a cold or sinus infection, from Rebel Mariposa from La Botanica, or really amazing recipes of people like veganizing like their grandmother's enchiladas or something, and then some poetry, artwork. There's always that creative element that goes in, but I have a lot of fun with it, and it's something that I like pursuing, because again, as artists, we're not just interested in art, we're interested in all these things going on, and we put it in our work somehow. And so for me with zines, it's super empowering, because you don't need anyone's permission to do it. When we think about writing or publications, we often think, oh, we need a publisher, we need some kind of an editor or something, but you can be all those things, and just kind of, it's all you. So I love that, and it can be about anything you want. And so for me, it helps me get out ideas in words in different ways than like a painting can, and so it helps me have to be able to express, I think, these thoughts in different formats. So I love that zines are a way to provide a platform for voices. And so maybe someone's writing poetry in their little journal, but they've never shown it to anyone, and like it's a way for someone to be like, okay, like maybe I'll get published for the first time, and that helps you with your confidence and feeling like you're an artist. So I love that it's a way to spread that creative ability.
Yeah, that's what's so wonderful about zines. They're accessible. They're not intended to make money like magazines. They don't cost anything. And I'm also glad that you corrected my assumption that it's on a fixed schedule, because it can be
Mhm.
essentially whatever you want. And they're a great way to distribute information and art and poetry. And Now there, since I mean your art in general and your decolonization work is also it's about breaking down structures. So I think zines are they're pretty representative of that.
Yeah, you're right about like the kind of the economy of it, and how it's not about, like no one thinks they're gonna, pay the bills with it, but there's something great about when you go to a zine event or release or a fest or something where we're all buying things from each other and we're trading, and there's a whole new kind of economy happening where we're sharing our funding our wealth our own way. Through creating and through often, topics that aren't mainstream or whatever. So it's beautiful. I love
Yeah,
it.
it sounds like it is. Um, so back to um, La Peña's current exhibit, which is going up soon, Pandemic and Resistance. You've submitted a couple of pieces for the show. Could you talk a
Mhm.
little bit about them?
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's so much going on right now that could be, I think, a topic for discussion in an exhibit like this. And I think oftentimes we want to make, because I feel like it's almost like an activist art show in a way. It's got like a maybe, I think of protest or that kind of thing. We want to make something that's like, I'm pissed off about this and I'm going to paint about it. And so I think what I wanted something I've been trying to challenge myself to do for the last few years is how can I make something that is, um, a positive, what good is happening right now, because we gotta maintain some kind of balance, between, anger, which is, yes, necessary, and it's not a negative thing at all. I think if we're conscious, then we're angry in some way, about things, but also, the things that bring us joy. And so for me and for a lot of people that I know right now, it's been gardening, and it's been, reconnecting with plants. And I think there was this almost, survival instinct that kind of happened when we've all realized for, in certain moments, like, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get groceries right now, or like essential, food items. And so, folks start collecting seeds, whether it's like, how to regrow my grocery, onions or something. There's grocery gardening, or going online or going to plant nurseries, or, um, it feels good to be around plants, and I think that that's something we've forgotten. And, sometimes it takes something like this maybe for us to remember, like we need plants, and also that they've been here way before us, right? And remembering that like they're all our ancestors as well, and, how can we learn from them, um, lessons about life, because they're so much wiser, than us, and they've endured and survived in ways that we're struggling to do. And so again, this is kind of tying with that, yes, like plant-based diet, but also, um, which I encourage, and I know it can be challenging, but also to grow your own food, and how that can be so satisfying and exciting to consume, right? And yes, it's so hard, especially in this Texas heat. And so a lot of learning is happening, and people are learning about, herbs to, keep our immune systems going. Like we hear a lot about, how to protect ourselves right now: masks, hand sanitizer, all these things, and like they're not talking about is how to better our immune systems.
Right.
It's that idea. It's always about the cure. It's never about the prevention, right? And so, what can we be taking on a daily basis, if it's, tea, or eating more vegetables, or, different, plant medicines, that we can kind of maintain our immune systems, rather than waiting for something, bad to happen and then trying to figure it out. Even though, you know, we can't prevent things all the time, right? And so even if we do get sick or get COVID, like how can if we're unable to get that hospital bed, is like, how can we find natural medicines to get us through it, and which isn't always gonna be the solution either, because I know there's horrible cases where dire things are needed. But gardening, and it's something my mom and my sister and I have been doing for a few years, and now even more so. And we'll mail seeds to each other, and and my neighbor, like, we'll share plants, or we'll share our harvest. And even though we have very different political views, it's like, well, what's our common ground? And I love that gardening can be that. So these paintings, and they're small paintings, and I haven't bought any art supplies during quarantine. I'm trying to work with like what I've got, and I kind of like that limitation. So I'm like scrounging for pieces of panel and some canvases I have lying around, or repainting over old paintings, which is also like pretty liberating. And it's like a painting that no one liked in grad school. You're like, I'm going to paint over here, that kind of thing. But so they're small, and that's haven't really worked this small in a while, but there's something really nice and intimate and fast about it. Um, and so I'm doing a lot of hands holding like a harvest, or dealing with a plant in some way. And so also some of them are my mom's hands or my sister's hands, and I like to be able to represent my family in them, because I think right now we're all missing our families as well, our our loved ones. And so that gardening and plants can be a way to kind of relate to one another right now, and be something positive to talk about, if we're on a family Zoom or something, like, not focus on all the bad news in the world, maybe like, oh yeah, here's my tomatoes I grew, or that, like, maybe we all have something to offer, and we all have a lot that we can learn from one another as well. And so in the paintings, there's also this kind of ojo, or this eye on the side of each one, or on the top of each one, and those are made out of the corn husks, and those are representing like Madre Tierra, like Mother Earth. She's watching us. She's noticing our willingness and our need right now, and our desire to reconnect with her. And so, when we're out in the garden, like, we're not alone. Like, we're being acknowledged. And as we get our hands dirty in that soil, to not just have it be about like gimme, gimme, gimme food, and like, but to practice patience, right? It takes forever to grow something, and to give thanks and gratitude, and to show the love of the land by little gift of water, or fertilizer, or compost, or something, as we have this give and take relationship. And yeah, that, I think, we're being seen, as we reconnect, in this way. It's good to see folks. This is like, it feels like a movement happening, like, just in the plant world, right? Of like needing to know where your food comes from, and then giving thanks to farm workers who have been going unrecognized for a lot of time right now, and especially those folks who are undocumented, or didn't receive a stimulus package, or like things like that are like working to feed us, and to just always be conscious of where our food is coming from. And to veganism is not always non-exploitative, right? It's like, whose hands grew that. And so to just try to be aware, and then the joy that comes out of growing our own food, even if it's just a little bit here and there, it's really nice.
Yeah. Um, what are some of your favorite things that you've grown?
Right now, I'm doing a loofah for the first time,
Oh,
and it is like blowing my mind. It's taken over a whole fence, and I put three little ones in, that were like little plants. I didn't do it by seed this time, but they are taking off, and I don't know when. I think it's after the summer, more into the winter, they'll start producing the fruit, but it's gonna be huge by then. And I just love the smell of it. It smells kind of like peppers, and so I'm looking forward to that. That's something that really has love to this Texas heat, which not everything has. I'm trying to experiment and see if how much I can grow from grocery seeds. So, like the seeds in a tomato from the grocery store, or from a cantaloupe or watermelon, bell peppers. And all those things are happen. They're happening. They're alive, and they're happening. I don't know how they're going to produce, because I'm sure, I know sometimes I buy organic, sometimes I don't. It's like, I'm just kind of experimenting and having fun, because I want to be able to share my results and say, like, you can actually do this from a grocery store plant, affordable, cost effective, stick it in the dirt outside, and this is, what you can do to make it happen. And so, um, yeah, experimenting with that. You think to when, like, you're a kid and you soak a bean in a paper towel, and it comes to life. What? And just kind of to regain that magic, right?
So what would you say to people who are kind of discovering plants for the first time, who maybe didn't grow up with gardening, or who are kind of noticing their own plant blindness and trying to maybe get into it, but are intimidated by this, like seeking connection, like you had said before? Um, you talked a little bit about, even just with grocery store um,
Mhm.
vegetables planting the seeds, but what is a good way, I guess, like to approach that process mentally, and have it be effective?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's me still. I didn't grow up gardening or anything. But I know that it's in my family. Like my grandfather, like, farmed and stuff like that, right? So, um, it's almost like that you can do it because it's in your DNA. But I think, just to experiment, and you don't have to show anyone. Not everything has to be publicized on social media. And like, maybe if you do something you're proud of and it makes you feel good, then yeah, do it. But I'm not against that. But to just play and see what happens. If I think also trying not to waste food, like knowing that, like, food scraps could become plants, or you can freeze them and make a vegetable broth, or you can, like, turn an old apple or an old banana into, like, a really yummy muffin or something, and, like, especially now I've been more and more conscious of, like, not wasting anything, and even produce items that maybe, like, you can get from the food bank, or that, like, different community organizations are putting out, free boxes of food. And, like, even that, there's things in there that you could regrow. And I think that's pretty cool. Especially if we live in, like, a big city or something, we don't have big plots of land or anything, but there's always something, I think, that can be done, with a little bit of dirt.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, staying positive, going outside. I think right now, since we feel really cabin fevery in a way, we makes us want to connect more, with nature. And so even just going on a walk in your neighborhood and kind of scoping out what plants people are growing, and maybe if they're attracting certain insects or birds, and thinking about, like, oh, I kind of want something like that. And just finding inspiration from a walk. And native plants, especially that are going to do good in for you in the soil that's around, your home. And just being conscious of those plants, seeing what naturally occurs around you too, I think is really cool. And then kind of doing the research and seeing, like, oh, is this something that, this plant is growing, like, and maybe I can use it for something, and maybe not. Maybe it's not meant for me, and, like, not everything is meant for us either. So
Yeah.
knowing that too, like, we don't want to, you know, exploit the land in any way. And, like, sometimes these things are for insects or animals, or pollinators, and not for us to eat, not for us to kill, just to be, for someone else, and so yeah.
I think I don't know, that's all such good advice. Thank you for all your wisdom on that. I'm sure just from time and observation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't claim to be an expert at
Oh,
all. I am totally an amateur experimenter, and I'm just having fun with it. Since we've kind of had to be home more, how can I entertain myself and be outside and
right.
and enjoy it and allow it to be kind of a meditative space away from the computer and all these things. Mm.
Yeah. Oh, I think people are embracing collective knowledge more anyway now. I've been noticing whether it's on like TikTok or just social media or whatever, people are just sharing what they've learned, and we're
Mhm.
we're questioning the experts a little more anyway these days.
Yeah. And taking advantage of all the like free online classes happening that otherwise like maybe happening in different parts of the world that you get to actually experience.
I know.
So I'm all about that.
Mhm.
There's a lot to learn.
So my last question for you today is about art making during this very challenging time.
Yeah.
And a lot of people either struggle to be motivated or maybe think they have so much time and maybe take on too much. It's hard to find, it can be hard to find a balance with new limited circumstances. So, what are some tactics that you found helpful, or perhaps what hasn't worked um, during the pandemic, trying to continue to create as an artist?
Yeah. I mean, I've heard it called creative paralysis or like all different kinds of things. For the first few months, I could not get in the studio, and it's like we kind of don't know why this happens, right? But I think for me, it was about like allowing myself to start fresh. And so what it was for me was procrastinating to clean my studio and make it seem like a fresh start. And so I finally got in there and kind of cleaned up, put some shelves up, organized things that needed to be organized, right? And that helped me to feel like, okay, now like art during COVID is happening, and to just like be able to call it that because like we don't have to be, pretending like we can just return to the series we were making last year or whatever. Things have changed, and our inner thoughts, our outward outlook, right, has changed, and how can we be making the same stuff? It wasn't going to happen for me. So, I needed that kind of clean slate. Really give my studio good cleaning and just think about experimenting. I would go out and just like I said, there's different flowers, different plants coming up in the yard, and I don't. I hesitate to call them weeds because I think there's a whole thing with like good plants, bad plants, whatever.
Mhm.
And so picking a bunch of flowers and drying them, and I'm still kind of doing that, and I have no idea what I'm going to use them for. But and I did end up using some for a Black Lives Matter image that I turned into a sticker and that kind of thing. But to just be able to collect materials or play with things. And again, it doesn't necessarily need to equate to a product or a finished painting or something, but just to feel creative in a way of like, I like how that flower looks. That's really pretty. I'm gonna dry it like I did when I was a kid and see what happens. Maybe it'll work in a painting. Maybe it will totally get gross and not happen. Or maybe I take a photo of it and that lasts longer. It's nice for me to now I'm able to get in the studio and I started making these small paintings that are going to be in the exhibit at La Peña. And I started making them not having a plan for them, which is kind of different than for me. I'm used to having like, okay, I have an exhibit coming up. I know I'm going to make like 10 paintings for it or something, right? And that deadline is really helpful for me because as visual creators, we often have to set our own deadlines, and that can be really tough. And so for me, I'm not always making something if I don't have something that it's for. And I kind of And I know that and for me, I feel like it's problematic because I'm not allowing myself to just make, right? It has to, like for me or for anyone, it's like it doesn't always have to be for someone else. And so also just acknowledging that idea of like art therapy or like making something can be really good just for meditation. I know sometimes when I paint, I find myself like, because I can be a really tight painter sometimes, and I'm like breathing and like focusing on my breath while I'm like painting, and like I'm like, am I meditating right now? Something's happening where I'm having this like really relaxing moment with moving paint around. And um so yeah, it's just remembering you don't have to make something for someone else for it to be exhibited or for it to be on your Instagram. Like you can make things just for you, and that can be enough. So yeah, I think making things that make you happy too, and not always wanting to. Because I think sometimes with like protest art or with political art, we tend to want to say, I'm angry about this thing and I'm going to paint about it, and then like, what is that's I don't think that's doing me good to be in my studio focusing so hard on something that upsets me. So to be making pretty pictures that are also kind of make you think, or maybe have this deeper meaning of something incredibly political, that's what's good for me. And that's not for everyone. And then again, all art is political, right? Because it depends on who's making it, why are they making it, when are they making it, what's going on in the world. And so it's all relative.
Yeah, that's a really good point. All art is political, and it doesn't have to be overtly so.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, but we do need the overt stuff,
Oh,
especially out in the
absolutely.
streets right now. Like,
Yeah.
yes. And I embrace that when I need to. Yeah.
Yep. Anyway, well, thank you so much for talking with me today. I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed learning all about your work. Yeah, just this was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandra. Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, hopefully we will meet in person sometime.
I hope so.
Hopefully that can happen. But
Yeah,
for
I
now,
look forward to the
yeah,
exhibit.
yes, yes, I'm looking forward to the exhibit as well. So thank you for participating and also um doing this interview with me. All right, I will let
Thanks,
you
of
get on with
course.
your afternoon.
Okay, have
All
a
right,
good one.
you too. All right, bye bye.
Take care.